My buddy Jonathan was the reason why nerds and jocks ate lunch together. Star quarterback who somehow got the Discord kids talking to cheerleaders. Metalheads helping student council. AP kids at stoner parties. He was the school spark. The kid who made our high school feel like one big friend group instead of 100 separate ones. Summer before junior year, his parents died. Drunk driver hit him head on coming back from his college tours. He came back to school 60 pounds lighter. Hollow eyes, black hoodie pulled up every day. Quit football. Dumped Sarah. Told her to stay away for her own good. Moved in with his grandma who had dementia and forgot his name daily. The kid who never stopped talking hadn't said a word in 2 months. All those friend groups he built started fracturing without him. He ate lunch in empty classrooms, walked with his head down, flinched when lockers slammed. That's when the jokes started. Kevin's definitely gonna shoot up the school. People he'd brought together now made school shooter bingo with squares like, wears black, sits alone, doesn't talk. The group chat he'd created freshman year became a Kevin watch, posting creep shots of him with captions like, day 47 of silence, planning something big. Even I started checking exits when he walked in, sitting where I could see his hands. But I still ate lunch with him in those empty classrooms because that's what friends do. He'd just stare at nothing while everyone placed bets on when he'd snap. Sarah got bullied for dating the future killer. Former teammates crossed hallways to avoid him. The week before Thanksgiving, everything escalated. Monday, Kevin's grandma had a stroke and died alone while he was in chemistry. He found out through the office intercom calling him down. Tuesday, Brad's crew surrounded him in the parking lot, making finger guns, screaming, "Where's your hit list?" loud enough for teachers to hear. They laughed. Tuesday night, someone leaked Kevin's address online with "School shooter lives here. Stay armed." His house got egged, windows broken, killer spray painted across the garage. Neighbors called cops on him for standing in his own yard. Wednesday was catastrophic. Morning started with fake wanted posters in every bathroom. Kevin's yearbook photo with crosshairs. Armed and dangerous. Do not approach. During second period, Brad pulled the fire alarm. When everyone evacuated, he screamed, "Kevin's got a gun." The stampede was instant. Kids trampled. Everyone filming Kevin standing there with empty hands up. Then during lunch, someone actually called 911, told them active shooter Kevin Lopez was in the building. Full lockdown. SWAT. Helicopters. News crews. They slammed him face first into the calculus floor. AR-15s pointed at his head. Zip-tied him while everyone filmed. Searched everything. Found nothing. Principal made Kevin apologize to the school for causing panic. After that, complete isolation. Nobody would go near him. Teachers moved his seat to the back corner. Some refused to call on him. Partners wouldn't work with him. Their parents called threatening to sue. The cafeteria would empty when he walked in. Even freshmen who didn't know him avoided him. Their parents had seen the news. Local students suspected in school threat. His name forever linked to those headlines. Kevin stopped coming to school. Friday night, 10 days after Kevin disappeared from school. He wasn't answering texts. I couldn't focus on anything, so around 11 p.m. I just drove to his house. His front door was unlocked. Found him in the basement playing Call of Duty, like we used to freshman year. Except there was a Glock 19 on the coffee table next to his Mountain Dew. 2 boxes of ammo. The junior class yearbook open to our grades photos. 31 faces circled in red. "Yo," he said, not looking away from the screen. "Been waiting for you." I sat on the old couch, staring at the gun. "Oh, that?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "Well, I'm the school shooter, right? Gotta play the part." Something was completely off. The way he laughed. How casual he was. This wasn't depressed Kevin or angry Kevin. This was something else. I was 16 years old, sitting in my friend's basement, watching him treat a loaded gun like a gaming accessory. He paused the game and grabbed his phone from the couch cushion, scrolling through something before turning the screen toward me. The video was shaky security camera footage from what looked like his front hallway. Timestamp showing last Tuesday at 2 p.m. Brad and 4 other guys from the team kicked in the front door while I watched Jonathan's jaw clench. They went straight upstairs to his parents' bedroom, throwing clothes everywhere, smashing picture frames against the walls. Brad grabbed a can of red spray paint from his backpack and wrote "killer" across the wedding photo above the dresser. One of them pissed on the bed. Another dumped out every drawer looking for something. Maybe the gun they thought he had. The video cut to them leaving 20 minutes later with his dad's watch collection and his mom's jewelry box. Jonathan's voice stayed flat when he said the cops told him it was just kids being kids. Boys will be boys. No real harm done. He swiped to another folder on his phone with hundreds of screenshots, photos, videos, every single thing they'd done to him since his parents died. Death threats in his DMS. Pictures of him at the grocery store with captions about target practice. Recordings of Brad's crew following him home chanting "shooter, shooter, shooter." 3 notebooks on the coffee table filled with dates, times, names, everything documented like evidence for a trial that would never happen. My hands were shaking as I flipped through page after page of harassment that nobody had stopped. Jonathan watched me read, then picked up a gun and held it out handle first. Asked if I trusted him. My whole body went cold, but I took it because what else could I do? Feeling how heavy it was, how real, how easy it would be to end someone's life with just one finger movement. He stared at me holding it and said, "Scary, isn't it? Knowing you have that power, knowing you could choose who lives and who dies." I set it down on the table as carefully as possible and told him this wasn't him. This wasn't the Jonathan who brought everyone together, who made our school better. He laughed again, that same wrong laugh, and said that Jonathan died in a car crash with his parents, that the person everyone loved got buried with him, and now there was just whatever this thing was that everyone hated. My eyes caught the family photos covering the walls, his parents smiling at his first football game, at Christmas, at his 16th birthday party just 8 months ago. Jonathan followed my gaze to the one from their last morning together. All 3 of them at breakfast before they left for the MIT campus tour. His voice cracked when he said they were doing it for him, driving 6 hours each way because he wanted to see the engineering program, and if he hadn't begged them to go that weekend, they'd still be alive. The guilt in those words felt like drowning. We sat there in silence until his eyes started closing around 3 a.m., the controller slipping from his hands as he dozed off on the couch. I stayed awake watching him sleep, the gun still sitting there between us on the coffee table like a test I didn't know how to pass. Part of me wanted to take it, hide it, call someone, but I knew that would just prove everyone right about him being dangerous. Another part wondered if maybe they were right. Around 4 a.m., I covered him with the old blanket from the back of the couch and just sat there in the dark trying to figure out what to do. The sunrise came through the basement windows, and I must have dozed off because I woke up to the smell of eggs and bacon. Jonathan was in the kitchen acting almost normal, humming some song from freshman year while he cooked breakfast like we used to do after sleepovers. The gun was gone from the table. He slid a plate toward me and mentioned he was thinking about Monday, whether he should go back to school or not, said everyone was expecting him to do something and asked what if he just didn't show up at all. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with text from Sarah asking if I'd seen Jonathan, if he was okay, because the group chat was going crazy with Brad's crew posting about finishing what they started on Monday about making sure the shooter problem got solved permanently. I showed Jonathan the messages, and he didn't even look surprised, just kept eating his eggs and said they wouldn't stop until something broke, either them or him. No middle ground anymore. After breakfast, he pulled out his laptop and showed me emails between him and some lawyer his parents had used for their will. The lawyer said he had a strong case against the school for failure to protect him, that the evidence was overwhelming, but warned it would take years and probably make things worse before they got better. Jonathan laughed at that last part and said justice through proper channels was the biggest joke he'd ever heard. We went outside even though it was freezing, sitting on the deck chairs his dad had built last summer, and for the first time since the accident, he actually talked about his parents, how his mom would have known exactly what to say to make this better, how she always had the right words when things got bad, how his dad would have walked into that school and raised hell until someone listened, would have protected him like fathers are supposed to protect their sons. He stared at the empty house next door where his grandmother used to live before the dementia got bad, before she forgot his name, before the stroke took her too. His voice got quiet when he said he was 17 years old and completely alone, that everyone who was supposed to protect him was gone, and everyone left wanted him gone too. I'm trying to understand how Jonathan went from being the person who connected everyone to becoming so isolated. Did losing his parents somehow break whatever special thing he had that made people trust him? The doorbell rang hard 3 times and we both froze. Jonathan grabbed the gun from the coffee table and shoved it behind the couch cushion. He pointed at the yearbook and I closed it fast, sliding it under a pile of old magazines. Through the basement window we could see red and blue lights flashing against the house. Jonathan went upstairs first and I followed, my hands shaking. 2 cops stood at the door with their hands on their holsters. Behind them I could see Sarah in her car, her face white. The officers asked if everything was okay, and Jonathan smiled, actually smiled, like nothing was wrong. He showed them the broken windows from last night, the spray paint on the garage, the eggs dried on the siding. His voice stayed flat and calm while he explained how kids had been attacking his house for weeks. The younger cop kept looking past him into the house, trying to see inside. Jonathan stepped aside and invited them in, which made my stomach drop. They walked through the living room, checking corners, looking behind furniture. Jonathan followed them around, pointing out more damage, a brick someone threw through the kitchen window, threatening notes shoved under the door. The officers asked about weapons and Jonathan shook his head, said he didn't feel safe having guns around when he was this stressed. I had to look away because the lie came out so smooth. A black sedan pulled up and Detective Thompson got out, tall guy with gray hair. He nodded at the patrol officers and walked straight to Jonathan, said this was the 4th time he'd been called to this address in 2 weeks, but something about him was different from the other cops. He actually looked at the damage, took pictures of the spray paint, picked up one of the bricks with gloves on. He asked Jonathan to tell him everything from the beginning. While Jonathan talked, the detective wrote in a small notebook, asking real questions, not just going through the motions. After 20 minutes, the patrol officers left, but the detective stayed. He walked around the house again, this time looking at angles, checking sightlines from the street. Sarah came to the door, and the detective let her in. She ran to Jonathan and hugged him, crying into his shoulder. Jonathan just stood there with his arms at his sides. The detective watched them for a moment, then said he'd be in touch. After his car pulled away, Jonathan stepped back from Sarah. He thanked us for stopping him, said he almost gave them what they wanted, almost proved them right, but his voice was empty, like he was reading lines from a script. Sarah started crying harder, saying she was sorry for everything, for not standing up for him at school. Jonathan just stared at the wall behind her. About an hour later, a Range Rover screeched into the driveway. Sarah's parents got out, her dad's face purple with rage. He pounded on the door so hard the frame shook. When Jonathan opened it, her dad grabbed Sarah's arm and yanked her toward the car. He said if Jonathan contacted her again, he'd call the police, get a restraining order, make sure Jonathan never saw her again. Sarah fought back, screaming that Jonathan was the victim, that everyone was destroying him. Her mom grabbed her other arm, and they dragged her to the car while she kept screaming. Jonathan watched from the doorway without any expression at all. After they drove off, he closed the door and walked back to the basement. I followed him down, and he went straight to his computer. He pulled up folder after folder of video files. Every attack on his house was there, filmed from hidden cameras he'd installed weeks ago. The egging, the spray paint, Brad's crew surrounding him, even tonight's police visit. He said he was building a case, either for court or for after. I didn't ask what after meant. He showed me timestamps, dates, faces clearly visible in the footage. He had their names typed out, their addresses, their parents' phone numbers, everything organized in spreadsheets like evidence files. I went to use the bathroom upstairs and noticed his bedroom door was open. Under his bed, I could see textbooks sticking out. When I pulled them out, they were chemistry books, advanced stuff about reactions and compounds. There was a notebook filled with formulas, diagrams of molecular structures. I shoved them back, but my hands were shaking worse now. Jonathan called up asking if I wanted pizza, and I said sure, trying to sound normal. Sunday morning came and we were still in the basement. We ordered Domino's and put on Netflix, pretending everything was fine, but I kept looking at where the gun was hidden behind the cushion. Jonathan caught me looking and said I was scared of him now too. Said that was good, maybe I'd survive this. I tried to laugh, but nothing came out. My phone started blowing up with notifications. Brad had posted a video online, yesterday's scene at Jonathan's house edited to make it look like Jonathan had threatened them first. The video already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. People were calling for Jonathan's arrest, saying he should be locked up, put in a mental hospital. Some comments had Jonathan's address, his photo, even his grandma's obituary. Jonathan read them over my shoulder, his face blank. The house phone rang and Jonathan put it on speaker. Principal Foster's voice filled the room, saying he was scheduling an emergency meeting for Monday morning. He said there were serious concerns about Jonathan's threatening behavior toward other students. Jonathan started laughing, real laughter but wrong somehow. He hadn't been to school in 2 weeks, but somehow he was still the threat. After he hung up, Jonathan walked upstairs to his parents' room. I followed and found him standing in the doorway. The room was exactly how they'd left it, except for Brad's spray paint across their bed. Jonathan said he used to come here to smell their clothes, to pretend they were just at work. Now it just smelled like paint and broken glass. His voice cracked and he covered his face with his hands. The doorbell rang again and we both jumped. Detective Thompson was back, standing alone on the porch. He came in and sat at the kitchen table, pulled out his notebook again. He said he'd been investigating the pattern, found similar cases at other schools. Kids targeted until they snapped, then blamed for the breakdown they'd been pushed toward. He looked right at Jonathan and said Jonathan wasn't the first, but they could make sure he was the last. Thompson pulled out a thick folder from his bag and spread papers across the table, pointing at donation records showing Brad's dad had given the school $300,000 over 5 years. His finger moved to transfer records of 6 kids who'd left Westfield High after run-ins with Brad, their parents' complaints buried in administrative files marked resolved. Jonathan stared at the papers while Thompson showed us emails between Brad's father and the principal, messages about keeping things quiet and protecting the Mitchell family reputation. I felt sick looking at photos of other kids Brad had targeted, their faces hollow like Jonathan's was now, reading their parents' desperate letters that went nowhere. Thompson explained how Brad picked vulnerable kids, ones already dealing with problems, making them easier to break and harder to believe. Jonathan just sat there tracing his finger over one name, a kid who'd attempted suicide last year after Brad's campaign against him. The detective needed Jonathan to testify, to finally stop this pattern, but Jonathan wouldn't even look up from the papers. I realized this went deeper than just bullying when Thompson showed us psychiatric evaluations from 3 former students, all diagnosed with PTSD after their time at Westfield. Jonathan finally spoke, saying justice wouldn't bring his parents back or fix what he'd become. Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang and Coach Harrison stood there holding a box of old game tapes, his face looking older than I'd ever seen it. He came in and admitted Brad's father had threatened to pull funding from the entire athletic program if he helped Jonathan, had made him choose between one kid and 40 others. The coach set up his laptop and tried playing highlights from when Jonathan was quarterback, touchdowns, and team celebrations, but Jonathan walked out of the room before the first play finished. Harrison followed him to the living room and revealed he'd been keeping records of every time the administration ignored reports about Brad, had emails and meeting notes going back 3 years. He needed Jonathan to help him take it to the school board, to finally expose the cover-ups, but Jonathan asked why he should save other kids when nobody saved him. The coach left the tapes on the coffee table, said he'd be at the board meeting Tuesday whether Jonathan came or not. I found Jonathan later in his grandmother's old room, sitting on her bed holding orange prescription bottles, counting pills she'd saved over months of cancer treatment. He said she'd been saving them for when the pain got too bad, except she died before she needed them, and now here they were. The way he held those bottles, turning them over in his hands, made my stomach drop because I knew what he was thinking without him saying it. I grabbed the pills, but he didn't fight me, just sat there staring at where they'd been in his hands. That evening, Sarah showed up even though her parents had forbidden her from coming near Jonathan's house, carrying a backpack full of printed screenshots and USB drives. She'd been collecting evidence for weeks, recordings of Brad bragging about driving Jonathan crazy, witness statements from kids too scared to speak up publicly, photos of the vandalism and harassment. She spread everything on the kitchen table, begging Jonathan to fight back the right way, through the system, to let the evidence speak instead of violence. So Jonathan had cameras recording everything this whole time? The way he organized all that evidence in spreadsheets makes me wonder if he planned to get pushed this far, or if he just started preparing when things got bad. Jonathan listened, then went to his room and came back with 3 binders, each one labeled with dates going back 6 months. Inside were his own records, every incident documented with times and witnesses, copies of reports he'd filed with police and school counselors, recordings of Brad's threats, photos of injuries, even security footage he'd somehow gotten from local businesses. He showed us responses from authorities, form letters saying they'd investigate, case closed stamps on reports, emails from the principal suggesting Jonathan consider transferring schools for his own well-being. Sarah started crying looking at how thorough he'd been, how hard he'd tried to do things right before everything fell apart. We were still going through papers when we heard engines outside, Brad's truck and 2 others pulling up, music blasting and voices shouting. Bottles started hitting the house, glass breaking against siding and windows, Brad's voice screaming about Jonathan being a psycho who should just kill himself already. Someone got out with a baseball bat and started smashing the mailbox, the metal clanging with each hit while they laughed and filmed it. Jonathan stood up calmly and walked to where he'd hidden the gun behind books on the shelf, loading it with the same mechanical precision I'd seen in the basement. He said they wanted a monster, so maybe it was time to give them one, and started walking toward the front door. I tackled him from behind and we crashed into the coffee table, wrestling for the gun while Sarah screamed for us to stop. The gun went off, the bullet punching through the ceiling and sending plaster raining down, the sound so loud it made my ears ring. Outside, Brad's crew went silent for a second, then tires squealed as they sped away, not knowing they'd almost died, thinking it was just another night of fun. Jonathan went limp under me, like the gunshot had broken whatever spell he was under, and we just lay there breathing hard with Sarah crying above us. Within 3 minutes, Detective Thompson was at the door, and I realized he'd been watching the house the whole time, waiting outside in an unmarked car. He took the gun as evidence, bagged it carefully while checking the ceiling damage, then said it was self-defense given the documented pattern of harassment. But we all knew how close it had come, how different this night could have ended, and Thompson's hands shook slightly as he sealed the evidence bag. Nobody slept that night, not me, not Sarah, who'd shown up crying after seeing the videos online, not Jonathan, who just sat there staring at his hands while Detective Thompson took statements and photos of everything. By dawn, we were zombies in Jonathan's kitchen, empty coffee cups everywhere, Sarah's mascara streaked down her face, Jonathan looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, like all the fight had leaked out through that bullet hole in his ceiling. Monday morning came and Jonathan said he wasn't going to school, said it quiet like he was asking permission, and Sarah and I called in sick without even discussing it because there was no way we were leaving him alone. We sat around his kitchen table trying to figure out what to do next when Jonathan's phone rang, and it was the school's automated system saying they were on lockdown. Then Principal Foster's voice came on saying they'd found a hit list in Jonathan's locker, and parents were already gathering in the parking lot demanding his arrest. Jonathan hadn't used that locker in 3 weeks, not since the SWAT thing, and I watched his face go completely blank as he realized someone had planted it there. Within 20 minutes, we heard sirens, and Detective Thompson was at the door again, but this time with 4 other cops who pushed past him into the house. Jonathan stood up slow, hands visible, told them to search whatever they wanted, almost eager like he wanted them to find something that would end all this. They tore through everything, found his chemistry textbooks from last year, the cheap security camera he'd bought to record the harassment, 3 notebooks where he'd been documenting every incident with dates and times and names. Detective Thompson kept trying to control the situation, but the other officers were treating it like a raid, one of them shoving Jonathan against the wall to pat him down, even though he was cooperating completely. Sarah pulled out her phone and started live streaming on Instagram, narrating how Jonathan was being targeted, how the evidence was obviously planted, and within minutes, hundreds of comments were pouring in. I watched over her shoulder as kids from our school called him a monster, said they always knew he was dangerous, that he should be locked up forever, and these were people I'd sat with at lunch just last week. Then one officer found Jonathan's observation notebook, the one where he'd been writing down who said what about him, trying to track the patterns of harassment, and immediately called it a kill list, even though Jonathan kept explaining it was documentation for his own protection. They cuffed him right there in his living room, arrested him for making terroristic threats, and Jonathan didn't even resist, just looked at me with these dead eyes as they read him his rights. Sarah and I followed them to the station in my car, her still streaming everything until her phone died, both of us watching them process Jonathan like he he was already convicted. They fingerprinted him, took his mugshot, strip searched him, put him in Orange County jail clothes, and through the glass doors I could hear two officers talking about how they'd stopped another school shooting just in time. Coach showed up with a lawyer he'd hired using his retirement savings. This woman in a wrinkled suit who immediately started fighting the charges, pointing out the timeline didn't match, that Jonathan couldn't have put anything in a locker he hadn't opened in weeks. But the desk sergeant just shrugged and said that was for the courts to decide. Jonathan's arrest was already trending on Twitter. Someone had leaked his mugshot, and the headline was, "Local teen arrested for school shooting plot." They let me see him for 5 minutes in the holding area, and through the bars, Jonathan looked almost peaceful, like a weight had been lifted off him. "It's over," he said, not even looking at me. "One way or another, it's finally over." That's when I realized he might not even fight the charges, might see jail as the only escape from what his life had become. Sarah's parents showed up around 6 that evening, but not to help. They came to file a restraining order against Jonathan, saying he was a danger to their daughter. Sarah completely lost it, screaming at them in the middle of the police station about abandoning someone who needed help, about being cowards, about how they were part of the problem, and other parents there for different reasons started recognizing her from the live stream, whispering and pointing. Then Brad's father walked in with the school board president, both of them in suits like they'd come from some emergency meeting, demanding to speak to whoever was in charge about pressing maximum charges. They had a folder full of screenshots from social media, the photo of the gun from last night, printouts of the hit list from the locker, and kept using words like clear and present danger and preventable tragedy, while Detective Thompson tried to argue that the evidence didn't add up, but he was just one detective, and they had the principal, the superintendent, and half the school board on their side. Jonathan's lawyer pulled out his laptop and connected it to the conference room screen, showing grainy black and white footage from Sunday night at 2:47 a.m. Everyone watched Jake Matthews, Brad's best friend since middle school. Jimmy opened Jonathan's old locker with a crowbar and shoved papers inside before spraying something on the metal and slamming it shut. The prosecutor barely glanced at the screen before pushing the laptop away and saying it didn't matter because Jonathan still brought a gun to school property and multiple witnesses heard him make threats. Detective Thompson slammed his folder shut and walked out while the superintendent started talking about zero-tolerance policies and making examples. 3 hours of arguing later, the judge set bail at $50,000, and Jonathan sat there staring at his handcuffed wrists like they belonged to someone else. Coach Harrison showed up with a cashier's check Tuesday morning, didn't say a word, just signed the papers, and drove Jonathan home in his pickup truck. The house looked like a war zone with every window covered in plywood, killer still bleeding through the white primer someone had tried to paint over it, and fresh eggs dripping down the siding. Mrs. Peterson across the street pulled her curtain shut when she saw them pull up, and the Martinez kids who used to ask Jonathan for homework help ran inside when their mom called them. I helped Jonathan carry his stuff inside while Coach waited in the truck, engine running, like he couldn't get away fast enough once he'd done his good deed. The email from school came while we were pulling moldy food from the fridge, just 3 sentences saying Jonathan was expelled pending criminal proceedings and banned from all school property including graduation. Jonathan read it twice, deleted it, then went back to scraping dried egg off the kitchen window without saying anything about MIT or any other college that would never want him now. Sarah called me that night crying because she'd seen Brad's group chat where they were planning to handle things ourselves since the courts were taking too long, complete with detailed plans about making it look like Jonathan killed himself out of guilt. She'd screenshot everything but knew from experience that cops would just call it kids being dramatic online, the same way they'd ignored all the death threats Jonathan got before everything went bad. The notebooks where Jonathan tracked who said mean things about him are making me wonder, did writing everything down help him feel less alone, or did seeing it all on paper make things worse? Wednesday morning, Jonathan started boxing up his parents' stuff to sell, pulling his dad's engineering books off shelves, wrapping his mom's ceramic collection in newspaper, each piece another memory of the family dinners and movie nights that would never happen again. I helped him load boxes without talking, because what was there to say when he was selling his whole life to pay lawyers who probably couldn't save him anyway? Detective Thompson showed up Thursday afternoon with his badge and gun in a cardboard box, said Brad's father filed a complaint about bias and got him removed from the case, and the new detective from the state already decided Jonathan was guilty and should be tried as an adult. Thompson sat on the porch steps and warned us off the record that they were going to destroy Jonathan, to send a message about school violence, make him the poster child for zero tolerance whether he deserved it or not. Friday, the lawyer met with prosecutors who acknowledged the hundreds of pages documenting Jonathan's harassment, but said it didn't excuse his escalation, then offered a plea deal where Jonathan would admit guilt, get 5 years probation, mandatory psychiatric treatment, and be labeled a violent offender for the rest of his life. Jonathan signed the papers to sell the house that afternoon, then sat in his empty childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling while I played video games on my phone, because being there was all I could do. Tuesday night, everything exploded when Brad showed up with 10 other guys carrying baseball bats and crowbars, surrounding the house and screaming for Jonathan to come out and face them like a man. Jonathan walked to the living room window and just stood there, visible through the broken blinds, not moving or reacting while they smashed the mailbox and started throwing rocks at the plywood covering the windows. I called 911 while Sarah went live on Instagram, streaming Brad swinging his bat at the front door, trying to break it down while his friends cheered and thousands of viewers started commenting about what they were watching. Jonathan stayed perfectly still at the window, hands at his sides, making no aggressive moves even when a rock broke through the plywood and glass showered around him. The comments on Sarah's stream started shifting from calling Jonathan a killer to asking why nobody was stopping Brad, why the cops weren't there yet, why Jonathan wasn't even trying to defend himself. When the police finally arrived, they arrested Brad's whole crew, but also cuffed Jonathan for instigating by standing at his window where they could see him, and Sarah kept streaming as they dragged him to a separate car, while Brad got helped into the ambulance for his injured hand. The double standard was so obvious that hashtag Justice for Jonathan started trending within an hour, thousands of people finally seeing what we'd been trying to tell them all along about who the real victim was. Within 2 hours, news vans started showing up at Jonathan's house and mine too, reporters knocking on doors asking for interviews about the viral video that was now everywhere. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications as hashtag Justice for Jonathan hit 1 million mentions, and other kids from across the country started sharing their own stories about being labeled potential shooters just for being quiet or wearing black or sitting alone. Jonathan got released from custody around midnight but refused to talk to any of the reporters camped outside the police station, just walked past them with his head down while they shouted questions about how it felt to be wrongly accused. The next morning he texted me that he wasn't doing any interviews because he didn't want to be anyone's poster child for bullying or become some kind of symbol when all all he'd ever wanted was to finish high school and go to college like a normal person. By Wednesday, the school board had called an emergency meeting about the harassment allegations, and the auditorium was packed with some demanding Brad be expelled, while others still insisted Jonathan was dangerous and shouldn't be allowed back in school. Sarah stood up and played the recordings she'd been making for weeks on her phone. Brad's voice echoing through the speakers, calling Jonathan a killer, planning the fake 911 call, laughing about how they'd get him arrested or maybe even shot by cops. The room exploded with parents yelling at each other, someone's dad shoving Brad's father when he called Sarah a liar, security guards rushing in to break up 3 different fights while the school board members just sat there looking terrified. Brad's father grabbed the microphone and threatened to sue everyone in the room for defamation, the school for allowing the harassment, Jonathan for emotional distress to his son, even Sarah for illegal recording. But then 4 other kids stood up and started telling their own stories about Brad targeting them over the years. One freshman showed texts where Brad threatened to spread fake nudes of her. Another kid had videos of Brad's crew jumping him behind the gym. A special needs student's mom read emails about Brad mocking her son's stutter until he stopped coming to school. Principal Foster stood up, said he was resigning effective immediately, and walked out while parents were still screaming at each other about lawsuits and criminal charges. 2 days later, the prosecutor dropped all charges against Jonathan, but the damage was already done because every college that had been interested in him had withdrawn their offers after seeing his name connected to school shooting threats in the news. Jonathan just shrugged when he told me, said he won the case but lost everything anyway since his parents were still dead, his grandma was gone, his reputation was ruined forever no matter what any court decided. That weekend I noticed he'd started giving stuff away, handed me his dad's watch saying I should have it since I'd been the only real friend through everything, gave Sarah his mom's jewelry box even though she tried to refuse it. He seemed weirdly calm for the first time in months, kept saying he was just simplifying his life, getting rid of things he didn't need anymore. But Sarah and I kept looking at each other because something felt really wrong about how peaceful he suddenly was. Monday morning, Brad got arrested at school in front of everyone for conspiracy to commit harassment, making terroristic threats, and felony vandalism for the damage to Jonathan's house, his dad's money, and lawyers couldn't stop it this time. Jonathan didn't even smile when I told him, just said Brad would get community service or maybe probation at worst. His life would keep going while Jonathan's was already over no matter what happened in court. Thursday afternoon, Coach Harrison pulled Jonathan aside after school and offered him a job helping coach the JV team, trying to give him something to focus on, some kind of purpose to help him move forward. Jonathan showed up to one practice, but I watched parents literally grab their kids and pull them away when they saw him, heard them whispering about him being the kid with a gun from the news, saw how the players kept glancing at him with fear, even though he was just holding a clipboard. He left without telling anyone, just walked off the field and texted coach later that he understood why it wouldn't work out. That night, Sarah came to his house and told him she loved him, had always loved him, didn't care what anyone thought or said about him, wanted to be with him no matter what. Jonathan told her that was exactly why he couldn't be with her, wouldn't drag her down into the mess his life had become, said she had a future ahead of her while he was just trying to survive each day without completely falling apart. Detective Thompson wasn't even on the case anymore, but he called me privately the next morning, said he'd seen this pattern too many times before, and Jonathan needed psychiatric help immediately, not because he was violent but because he was showing every sign of being suicidal. He said when kids like Jonathan finish fighting their battles, when there's no enemy left to focus on, no case to win, no one left to prove wrong, that's when they turn all that pain inward and do something permanent. Friday morning, I drove straight to Jonathan's house after Thompson's call kept me up all night and found the front door wide open with his phone on the kitchen counter next to a note that just said, "Going to find peace," and my hands started shaking. I called Sarah and Thompson while running back to my car, and we all met at the only place that made sense, Westfield Cemetery, where his parents were buried. We found him sitting between their headstones with a bottle of pills in his hand, the ones his grandma had saved up before she died. He looked up when he heard us coming and said he was just so tired of fighting and hurting and being the monster everyone thought he was. I sat down next to him and started talking about freshman year, about how he got the theater kids to come to football games and the jocks to watch the school play. Sarah reminded him how he taught the debate team to play poker and got the stoners to join student government. Thompson stayed back, but I could see him ready to move if needed. I told Jonathan that Brad might have won the battle, but Jonathan had already won the war because he exposed everything, made people see what really happens when you push someone too far. His parents would be proud that he survived all this, that he didn't become what they tried to make him. That's when something finally broke inside him, like a dam bursting after months of holding everything back. He dropped the pills and started sobbing, real ugly crying like I'd never seen from anyone, his whole body shaking as months of grief poured out. Sarah and I held him while he cried about his parents, his grandma, how he couldn't remember what his mom's laugh sounded like anymore. How did Thompson know exactly what was happening with Jonathan when he wasn't even on the case anymore? The way he recognized that pattern about kids turning pain inward after winning their battles is really specific. We sat there for 4 hours as he talked about everything he'd been holding inside, how he didn't know who he was without them, how the house still smelled like his dad's cologne. Thompson eventually called for help, and Jonathan went voluntarily, no cops or drama, just a quiet ride to Riverside Psychiatric. 2 weeks later, when I visited him there, he'd gained 15 pounds back and actually smiled when he saw me. Sarah came every day after school and even brought his old guitar, which he started playing again. The hollow look in his eyes was fading, replaced by something tired but determined. Brad's trial started 3 weeks after that, and Jonathan testified through video link from the facility, calmly describing every single thing Brad had done. Brad's lawyer tried to make Jonathan look dangerous, but the prosecutor had all our videos, all the evidence, and the jury saw exactly what happened. Other kids testified about Brad's harassment campaigns, how he'd pick targets and destroy them for fun. Teachers admitted they saw the bullying but thought it was just boys being boys until it got dangerous. The school board got sued by 4 different families, and suddenly everyone wanted to fix things. Brad got convicted on multiple charges including harassment, conspiracy, false reporting, and cyberbullying. Judge sentenced him to juvenile detention until 18 plus 5 years probation after. His dad's construction company lost all its school contracts, and Brad's college recruitment letters disappeared overnight. Jonathan watched the verdict on the facility TV and just said it didn't bring his parents back or undo anything. The school rushed to implement new policies, mandatory counseling, anti-bullying programs, and they even wanted to name it after Jonathan's parents. He refused to go to the dedication ceremony and told them they were using his parents' death to cover their failure. After 30 days of treatment, diagnosed with complex PTSD and severe depression, but stable enough to leave, Jonathan moved in with Coach Harrison, who'd gotten emergency guardianship. The house where 3 generations of his family had lived lived, went up for sale because he couldn't stand being there anymore. Sarah's parents showed up at Coach's house 2 weeks later with a box of store-bought cookies and faces full of shame. They stood on the porch shifting their weight while Sarah's mom kept saying how wrong they'd been about everything, how they wanted to help with legal fees if Jonathan needed anything. Jonathan listened from the doorway without inviting them in, arms crossed, and when they finished, he just nodded and said, "Trust doesn't come back that easy, but maybe someday." The next morning, I helped him fill out online school applications at Coach's kitchen table, both of us knowing MIT was gone forever, but the local community college had a decent program that would let him start fresh. His therapist came twice a week to Coach's house, this older woman who didn't push too hard but got him talking about stuff he'd kept locked up since his parents died. Recovery wasn't some straight line either. Some days he'd be almost like his old self, and then something small would trigger him, and he'd shut down for hours. 3 weeks after the apology, Jonathan went back to school once to clean out his locker while classes were in session. Kids stared through classroom door windows, and a few came out to say they were sorry, that they'd been wrong, but Jonathan just grabbed his stuff without looking at anyone, and told them it was too little too late. Detective Thompson met us in the parking lot afterward with paperwork showing he'd gotten Jonathan's arrest record expunged, so it wouldn't follow him to job applications or college transfers. He mentioned this support group for trauma survivors that met at the community center on Thursdays, and Jonathan actually wrote down the information, which was huge, considering he'd refused any group stuff before. Spring came slowly that year, and by March, 3 months after that night in the basement, Jonathan had started online classes at the community college and gotten a part-time job at this used bookstore downtown where nobody knew his story. He wasn't the same person who used to unite the whole school, but he wasn't that hollow shell either, just someone different trying to figure out who he was now. Tyler and Sarah became these constant presences without being pushy about it, showing up for movie nights at Coach's house where Jonathan would sometimes even pick what they watched. He was learning to carry the grief instead of drowning in it, his therapist said, which sounded about right to me. Mother's Day hit different that year when Jonathan asked if I'd drive him to the cemetery, first time he'd been since the funerals. He brought flowers for all 3 graves, his parents and his grandma, and stood there for almost an hour talking to them about his progress, his struggles, how he was trying to honor them by not giving up. The therapy group turned out to be good for him too. Bunch of people who'd been through different kinds of hell, but understood that specific weight of carrying trauma. When he finally shared his story after going for 6 weeks straight, the whole room just nodded because they got it, saw him as human instead of victim or threat. By late May, we were meeting at this coffee shop near the community college campus. Jonathan actually talking about his classes and his job like normal stuff mattered again. This woman recognized him from the news coverage and started walking over, but her friend pulled her away, and Jonathan didn't even notice because he was showing us this book about quantum physics he'd been reading at work. 6 months after that night in the basement, Jonathan started helping coach youth football at the community center, not at our high school, but somewhere completely new where his story wasn't the first thing people knew about him. When this 10-year-old kid broke down during practice about his parents getting divorced, Jonathan sat with him on the bleachers for 20 minutes, told him pain doesn't disappear, but it does become something you can carry. The kid listened and calmed down, and Jonathan realized out loud that he might actually make it through this, different and scarred but alive, and finally choosing to stay there.